Out here in the Wild West, a man's past rides with him.
She tried to rob his heart. He let her. She came riding out of the dust, looking for a place to hide, or maybe just something to take. Thought she could steal his silver, his horse, maybe even his peace. But the man she met had nothing left to lose, except a heart too tired to fight. He didn't stop her, didn't raise a gun, just poured her coffee and let her stay. "If you're gonna rob me, darling," he said, "start with the heart. It's already half gone." And that's how it happened. The thief found love, and the cowboy found a reason to give again. 'Cause love, it ain't something you steal. It's something you let go. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. The Stranger at Dusk. The sun was setting at the edge of the 19th century, along the borderlands of Texas and New Mexico. The wind carried a fine red dust, swirling like ashes around a lonely wooden house in the middle of the prairie. The fading light burned low on the horizon, painting the dry grasslands in gold. In that last breath of daylight, a man sat on the porch, quietly pouring coffee from an old black iron pot. Elias Kane, 40 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and eyes the color of deep earth. His gaze was calm, kind, yet heavy with something the wind could never carry away. He lived alone out here with a few horses, a deep well, and the kind of silence that never really ends. The only sounds were the wind brushing the wooden fence, the soft clink of a metal cup against the table, and the slow breathing of a man long accustomed to solitude. Then, through that vast emptiness, a figure appeared. A woman on horseback, her cloak covered in dust, hair tangled and wild in the wind. She stopped right at the gate, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on the porch on the man who sat there, still as stone. Lydia Cole. A name he had never heard, like so many souls who wandered the borderlands. Her eyes carried both fear and defiance. "Evening," she said, voice rough. "I just need some water. I'll be on my way." Elias looked at her for a long moment. His gaze wasn't cold, nor curious. He simply stood, walked to the well, filled a tin cup, and handed it to her. "You look thirsty," he said softly. "Not dangerous." Lydia took the cup, but one hand stayed hidden inside her coat where a revolver rested quietly. She studied him, the rough hands, the worn leather jacket, the steady eyes that held no suspicion. It was as if nothing in this world could still frighten him or make him guard what he had left. He didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask where she was going. He simply went back inside, poured another cup of coffee, set it down, and sat again. Lydia stood there for a while. The wind blew strands of hair across her face, carrying the scent of coffee and wood smoke. Night slowly fell. The sky turned a deep shade of blue. A lantern flickered to life inside the cabin. Lydia sat on the porch, sipping her first warm drink after days on the run. Elias stayed silent, didn't look at her, didn't smile, but his presence somehow told her, "You can rest here, if you need to." Midnight. Elias was asleep. The wind whispered through the cracks in the door. Lydia stepped inside, careful, quiet. The cabin was small, one bed, an old wooden wardrobe, and a dying fire. She opened the wardrobe, looking for money. Her hands trembled from hunger, from guilt, or maybe from something deeper she couldn't name. In the bottom drawer, she found a faded photograph. A woman smiling in Elias's arms, sunlight wrapping around them like gold. Beneath the photo, faint words carved in shaky handwriting. You can't steal what's already given. Her hand froze. Her heart began to race not from fear, but from something awakening inside her. And then, from behind, his voice came low, rough, not angry, but almost tender. If you're gonna rob me, darling, start with the heart. It's already half gone anyway. Lydia turned around. Tears gathered in her eyes. Elias stood there, his shadow blending with the darkness. His gaze soft, almost forgiving. Neither of them spoke again. Outside, the wind kept moving through the fence. The scent of coffee lingered in the air, and there, in that harsh and silent land, two lost souls found each other not with a gun, but with kindness. Part 1. The woman who came with dust dawn spilled over the cracked earth like light over an old mirror. The wind carried the scent of burned grass, dust, and fresh coffee simmering on an iron stove. Lydia Cole woke to the sound of wind hissing through the wooden roof. Her head felt heavy, like after a long fever. On the table sat a steaming cup of coffee beside a neatly cut piece of dry bread placed so carefully it felt like the person who left it feared waking her too soon. The cabin was small but tidy one bed, a wall lined with saddles, a rifle polished clean. No sign of last night's tension, no suspicious stares, no ropes, only the wind and the scent of coffee. Outside, Elias Kane was already in the yard, leading his horse toward the pasture. His movements were slow, steady, and calm like he was part of the morning itself. The early sunlight brushed his worn leather jacket and caught in the streaks of gray in his hair. The man didn't speak much, didn't look back. And somehow, that made Lydia unsure whether she should fear him or thank him. She stepped onto the porch, the coffee cup warm in her hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse from thirst and dust. Elias only nodded, not turning around. "Drink it while it's hot," he replied, his voice low and calm like the wind sliding across the open plains. No questions. No, who are you? No, where'd you come from? No, what are you running from? It was as if he'd stopped needing to know such things or had long run out of reasons to care. Lydia sat on the porch step, watching him. His hands were rough, tanned, every motion deliberate and sure. She'd seen many kinds of men thieves, drunks, deserters, but never one like him. A man who didn't ask, didn't demand, didn't judge. She looked down at her dusty boots, fingers trembling as she lifted the cup. She'd been hit, cursed at, called a liar, a thief, a piece of nothing. And yet, this morning, someone had poured her coffee as if she were worthy of kindness. The wind picked up. Her hair blew across her face, hiding one eye. Elias turned then, catching her gaze. He didn't look away, didn't flinch. There was no pity in his eyes, no curiosity, only something deeper. For a heartbeat, she saw it understanding. That quiet kind of recognition only two broken souls can share. Without meaning to, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper carried by the wind. "Why are you helping me?" Elias didn't answer right away. He set the reins down, brushed dust from his palms, and looked toward the rising sun behind the dunes. The silence stretched between them, warm and endless. Then he said, softly but steady, 'cause maybe someone once helped me too. His voice was rough, tired and honest, not grand, not poetic, but it hit her harder than any sermon or promise ever could. Lydia turned away, hiding the tear that slipped down her cheek. Maybe, for the first time in years, she didn't have to pretend to be strong. Elias went back to his work, leading the horse toward the open field. Lydia stayed on the porch, hands wrapped around the cup, watching his figure fade into the golden plain. The morning light touched his shoulders. Then the cup in her hands, and in that quiet moment, somewhere between dust and sunlight, Lydia realized something she hadn't felt in years. Not everything in this world was dangerous. Some people, like Elias Kane, carried both their pain and their kindness, and maybe that's what made them dangerous after all. Not because they had a gun, but because they made you want to believe again. Part 2. Firelight and Lies. Night fell like a heavy blanket over the prairie. The sky outside shimmered with pale silver light, and the wind carried the scent of smoke and coffee still lingering in the air. Inside the small wooden cabin, the oil lamp flickered on the table, casting warm golden light across the calloused hands of Elias Kane. He sat quietly before the fire, one hand stirring his coffee, the other resting beneath his chin. The room was so still that even the wind's hiss through the cracks in the wall sounded loud. Lydia sat across the table, wrapped in the thick coat he had lent her. She watched the firelight dance on the walls, then glanced at him, the man who had saved her from hunger and fear, yet somehow unsettled her more than either. "You live here alone?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Elias nodded. "As long as the wind keeps blowing, I reckon I'll stay." The answer sounded like an old promise, simple, weary, and quietly sad. Lydia's eyes drifted around the room. There was nothing of real value: one bed, a few farming tools, a rifle on the wall, and beside it, a photograph. She rose slowly, stepping closer. Her fingers brushed the worn wooden frame. A woman smiled from the picture-soft eyes, hair to her shoulders, holding a small bunch of wildflowers. Underneath the frame, a name carved with a knife, Clara. Lydia turned and met Elias's gaze. He said nothing. The lamplight touched his face, calm, yet burdened, as if the fire itself was burning through his memories. "Your wife?" she asked softly. He nodded once, slowly, then turned away. "Long time ago." Silence settled between them, thick, almost sacred. Lydia felt her heart beat faster and didn't know why. Maybe because she'd just seen a kind of loss she recognized, one she carried, too, but had never dared to name. To break the quiet, Lydia lied. A small lie, but one she needed to keep her distance. "I'm on my way home," she said, staring into the fire. "My folks are up north. Just got lost, that's all." Elias didn't question it. He simply nodded, his eyes still and deep as a dry lake. No interrogation, no suspicion, only the soft reflection of firelight in his eyes, warm, steady, and believing. It confused her. Her whole life, no one had ever believed her. When she told the truth, they called her a liar. And now, when she lied, someone believed. The lamp flickered. Golden light traced her tired face, revealing eyes that had forgotten how to rest. Her chest tightened, not from fear of being caught, but because he trusted her without asking why. Elias stood, poured more water into the kettle, and spoke in that quiet, grounded tone of his windle calm by morning. You should stay another day. Sand traps out west not safe to ride tonight. Lydia didn't answer. She just watched him for a long while. In the trembling light, he looked both strange and familiar, like a memory she wasn't sure she'd ever lived. When he went to his room, she stayed by the fire, staring at the wavering flames. Outside, the wind howled against the tin roof, a haunting echo of nights she'd spent running, cold, hungry, and utterly alone. Her hand slipped into her coat, feeling the cold steel of her gun. She could leave now, take the horse, take the small pouch of money on the table. No one could stop her, but her legs didn't move. Lydia stood, walked to the door, hand on the latch, and froze. She whispered into the darkness, voice barely a breath. You trust too easy. From behind her, his voice came low, quiet, but heavy with truth. Maybe that's the only way trust ever starts. She turned. He was leaning in the doorway, his shadow long across the wooden floor. The lamp had gone out, leaving only the dying fire, its glow soft against the weary smile of a man who had lost too much, yet still believed that trust once planted could save two lost souls. Lydia lowered her eyes and gently closed the door. That night, she didn't leave, because sometimes we don't stay for safety. We stay for the one look that doesn't judge. And from that moment, in the whispering wind and flickering firelight, their story of healing quietly began. Part 3, The Days of Silence. The western sun rose slow and merciless, spilling its golden heat across the cracked plains. Light like honey ran down the dry grass, brushing over the old wooden fence and the porch where Elias Kane still made coffee every morning. Since that night, Lydia hadn't left. There was no deal, no invitation. She simply stayed, as if the world outside had been too loud for too long, and this lonely patch of land was the only quiet place left to breathe. In the mornings, she cleaned the stables, carried buckets from the well, brushed dust off the table. Elias worked beside her, hammering fence posts, replacing old boards, silent, steady. They rarely spoke, only traded brief glances when paths crossed. When she set the bucket down, he nodded. When he handed her a piece of bread, she answered with a small smile, fleeting, almost shy. Days were made of wind. Nights were made of silence. And somewhere between the two, something began to grow slow and fragile, like a blade of grass forcing its way through dry soil. One afternoon, Elias brought out a black horse, its eyes sharp, burning like coal. He said, "This one's got a temper, but if you treat it right, it'll listen." Lydia smirked, half wary, half daring. Sounds familiar. Elias didn't answer, just motioned for her to step closer. The horse tossed its head, stomped, snorted. Lydia hesitated, heart pounding. Elias rested a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and calm. "Don't try to control it. Just show it you mean no harm." His hand was warm, steady. In that small, wordless moment, Lydia felt something shift inside her. It wasn't the horse she stopped fearing, it was life. Because somehow, the man beside her who could calm a wild animal with quiet was also steadying the storm inside her chest. By dusk, smoke curled from the chimney. Lydia tried cooking potatoes, beans, a little salted meat. The smell of smoke and grease filled the room. Elias stepped in, frowned at the haze, then gave a rare, faint smile. "You planning to burn my house down?" "No," she said, "just dinner." Then don't forget the salt. You know how to cook, only when hunger teaches hard enough. They both laughed a small sound, but enough to warm the room more than the fire. That night, they ate facing each other in silence. The soft clink of a knife, the wind's whistle through the cracks, the oil lamp trembling on the table. Outside, the prairie glowed red under sunset. For the first time in years, Lydia felt peace, no chasing, no gunfire, no accusing eyes, just the quiet man before her, and the gentle hush that seemed to settle around them both. She spoke softly, afraid to break the stillness. Don't you ever feel lonely out here? Elias looked up, his eyes reflecting the same gold light that filled the fields. People leave, he said slowly, but the land stays. Maybe hearts do too. The words lingered soft, sad, true like the last note of a song carried away by wind. Lydia held his gaze. In her eyes flickered something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Trust, maybe even hope. She didn't say, "Thank you." She just lowered her head, and a faint smile brushed her lips like passing breeze. But Elias understood. The woman who had come to him with dust and deceit was beginning to believe in quiet things, in safety, in kindness, in peace. That night, Lydia sat on the porch, watching the horses sleep under the moonlight. For the first time in a long time, her heart didn't race with fear. Just a thought, soft as breath, crossed her mind. Maybe we don't need a place to hide. Maybe we just need someone who makes us want to stay. Part 4. The Bandits Return. The western evening burned red as blood. The sun hung low, spilling molten light across the dry fields, painting the fences and porch of Elias Kane's ranch in copper fire. From far away came the rhythmic, heavy beat of hooves, too even, too deliberate. Not the sound of traders, nor ranch hands. Heavier, rougher. The kind of sound that carried trouble with it. Elias was stacking hay by the stable when he heard it. He froze, lifting his head. He knew this land's language, the hiss of wind, the squeak of rope, the chirp of insects. But this sound didn't belong here. From the cabin, Lydia stepped out, a damp cloth in her hands. The wind caught her hair. Her face went pale as the hoofbeats drew closer. Her eyes darkened with something between dread and memory. Elias glanced at her once enough to understand. He said nothing, only loosened the strap on his gun belt and rested his hand on the Colt's grip. His gaze turned toward the road, already blurred with rising red dust. 3 riders emerged from the horizon, faces half hidden beneath hats and scarves. The lead man, broad-shouldered with a beard like dried mud, grinned through cracked teeth. "Well, I'll be damned," he rasped. "Little Fox ran home after all. Thought you'd died out in the desert. Girl." Lydia stood still. Her fingers clutched the edge of her skirt, trembling. She had heard that voice in her nightmares. Elias stepped forward, slow, steady his tone, calm, almost casual, as if speaking at a saloon table. This land don't take kindly to men who ride in armed. The bearded man spat on the dirt. "And who the hell are you? Cowboy? Her new keeper? Or just another fool, dumb enough to house a snake?" Lydia's breath quickened, her eyes welled with tears. "Elias, don't, please. I'll go. They just want the money." He didn't turn. His voice was low but firm. "Ain't nobody going anywhere. No debts here. No masters. Only the land." The bearded man snorted. The land. Huh. Let's see if it keeps you standing after I drop you on it. The wind stopped. The air thickened, heavy and waiting. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Elias took one more step forward. The sunset carved half his face in gold and shadow, glinting off the steel at his hip. He spoke softly, each word cutting clear. She doesn't belong to you. Not anymore. Lydia's heart stuttered. Her voice cracked. Don't do this. Elias, I ain't worth it. He turned to her, and in his eyes, warmth burned through the fading light. Never was about worth. It's about choice. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Sunlight, dust, wind, breath all suspended between two people and one truth. Then a gunshot split the air. The echo rolled across the field like thunder. Crows exploded from the trees. Smoke curled through the dying light. The bullet tore the hat clean off the bearded man's head and sent it tumbling into the dirt. He flinched, eyes wide, realizing the warning. Elias stood unmoving, gun lowered, the barrel still smoking. That was a warning, he said, voice deep and unshaken. Next one won't miss. The three riders hesitated. Then, wordless, they turned their horses and rode off, swallowed by the red dust and wind. Lydia's knees gave out. She sank to the ground. Elias holstered his gun and walked to her, his hand steady as he lifted her up. His touch was warm, the kind of warmth that carried both safety and truth. She choked out between tears. You shouldn't have done that. They'll come back. Elias shook his head gently, his hand resting on her shoulder. When fear rules a man, the bastards always return. But when he stands his ground once the wind starts to change direction. She looked up at him, tears streaked with dust. In his eyes, she didn't see judgment, only resolve and something that felt dangerously close to grace. The sand'll cover their tracks soon, he said quietly. But trust once planted grows back, even out here. Lydia couldn't speak. She leaned against his chest, listening to his heartbeat strong, slow, certain. And in that moment, she understood. Some people don't save you because you deserve it. They save you simply because they choose to. Part 5. The Confession. The western night was still like a prayer whispered into eternity. Above them, the moon hung low, silvering the spines of cactus and the shadows of sleeping horses across the plain. The fire crackled softly on the porch, its orange glow painting Elias and Lydia in flickering light, their shadows stretching long across the dry earth. The night wind carried the scent of burned grass and smoke, weaving gently through Lydia's hair. They sat facing each other, silent for what felt like hours. Only the sound of firewood popping and the faint clink of Elias's silver spoon as he stirred his coffee. Lydia watched him, the fire reflected in his eyes deep enough to make a person forget their past. She bit her lip, fingers gripping her coat. The silence pressed on her chest until she couldn't bear it any longer. I have to tell you something. Her voice trembled, thin as the wind itself. Elias didn't move, only nodded slightly, his gaze still on the flames. That first night I came here, I didn't just want water. I came to rob you. I was going to take your money, your horse, and if I had to, your trust too. She spoke all at once, like someone afraid the courage would vanish if she stopped. The firelight danced across her face, catching the shimmer of tears. She couldn't look at him. She feared those eyes, the same eyes that once made her believe might now be the ones to break her. Silence fell again, heavier than before. The fire cracked once, a single ember bursting into the air. Elias set his cup down and finally looked up. His voice came low, rough, but with a warmth that reached straight through the night. "You're right. You did take something." Lydia's head jerked up, eyes wide, her lips trembling. I have nothing worth taking." He smiled faintly, a slow, tired smile, gentle as moonlight on the dust. "Wasn't the money, wasn't the horse. It was my heart, but I let you take it." She froze. Every sound around her faded, the wind, the fire, even her own breath, until only his words remained, echoing like forgiveness. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a confession of love. It was something softer, a truth that melted the walls she'd built, like embers turning to light in the dark. Lydia broke down, tears spilling freely. Not from guilt, but because, for the first time, someone saw her for who she was. Not a liar, not a thief, just a person worthy of being believed. Her hands covered her face, shoulders shaking as her sobs blended with the whisper of the wind. Elias didn't speak. He simply reached across the fire, his hand brushing hers, a small, steady touch. No demand, no claim, just the quiet message of understanding. The fire kept burning, crackling softly, witness to two souls laying their ghosts to rest. Lydia looked up again, her tear-streaked face lit by the flame. In Elias's eyes, she saw something she'd never known before, proof that not everyone comes to take. Some are born to give. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire until the first line of dawn touched the fields. Her tears had dried, but warmth remained, the last ember of the night still glowing in her chest. And for the first time in years, Lydia Cole felt forgiven, not by God, not by law, but by the heart of a quiet cowboy who had lost too much, yet somehow still had enough left to love again. Part 6. The morning after dawn came softly to the west like a breath you could almost miss. The first light slid over the rolling hills, spilling gold across the parched grass, bathing everything in a tenderness this land rarely allowed. No more howling wind like the night before, only familiar sounds now: the snort of horses, the creak of rope against a fence post, and the slow, bubbling murmur of coffee boiling in an old iron pot. Inside the small wooden house, Lydia Cole opened her eyes. Sunlight streamed through the window, brushing her face, glinting across hands roughened by years of running and surviving. She hadn't slept, just watched the fire fade into ash, listening to the steady rhythm of Elias Kane's breathing from the next room, as if each breath tethered her gently to the world again. The house was still. Ashes from last night's fire lingered on the table, tiny ghosts of warmth. Lydia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, the one she'd once planned to steal. It felt light in her hand, yet it carried the weight of every mistake she'd ever made. She set it on the wooden table. The soft thud echoed like a full stop, the end of her running. For a long moment, she stared at it. That little bag, once her symbol of survival, now looked like a cage she'd built around her own heart. The door creaked open. Elias stepped out, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled, calm as morning itself. The smell of fresh coffee followed him in, warm and rich. He didn't glance at the pouch on the table. He just poured boiling water into the tin pot, then filled 2 old metal cups. "You're up early," he said, voice rough, soft as mist. Lydia nodded, silent. In the golden light, Elias looked different, less burdened, more at peace. For the first time, he looked like a man who belonged to the morning, not the ghosts of his past. He set a cup before her. Steam curled between them, carrying the scent of coffee and something unspoken. Neither spoke for a while. Then Lydia whispered, her voice barely steady. "Guess I can't steal what's freely given." Elias looked up through the rising steam. A faint smile touched his lips, tired, gentle, and warm as the sun over the plains. "Told ya, sweetheart. I let ya." The words melted through her like sunlight breaking frost. Lydia smiled through tears, not from happiness, but from the release that comes when a burden finally lifts. He studied her quietly. "You plannin' to leave?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted toward the window where sunlight swept the grass, and horses grazed lazily beneath the wind. She'd spent half her life running from men, from mistakes, from herself, but never had she felt this still inside. "I don't know," she said softly. "I don't have anywhere left to go." Elias turned toward the horizon, his voice low and thoughtful. "Then stay. This land don't ask for reasons. It only needs hands willing to tend it again." The words fell into her heart like seeds into dry earth. She looked up, her eyes glistening a mix of tears and sunlight. They sat quietly, drinking coffee together. Light streamed through the curling smoke, painting their faces with soft gold, 2 broken souls warmed by each other's stillness. The room needed no words, just the scent of coffee, the rhythm of breath, and the slow ticking of time, healing what it once shattered. After a while, Lydia murmured almost to herself, "I used to think men like you didn't exist." Elias raised a brow. "Men like me." She smiled faintly. Men crazy enough to believe in someone who's lied, who's done wrong, and still reach out anyway. He took a sip, eyes narrowing against the morning light. "Ain't crazy. Just that sometimes a man sees himself in the lost ones." The words struck deep, simple, but opening something locked for years. In him, she saw her own reflection: loneliness, weariness, and the desperate wish to believe in good again. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of warm earth. A new day had begun in truth. Elias stood, pulling on his jacket. "Come on," he said. "We've got fences to mend up north." Lydia laughed softly. "I've never worked a ranch before." "Then you'll learn." "I didn't know how to trust once either till you taught me." The words caught her off guard. For the first time, she realized he wasn't just saving her. They were saving each other. They stepped outside into the sunlight. The fields shimmered like a golden sea. Elias walked ahead, Lydia following her boots sinking into the soft earth. Halfway to the fence, she turned back. The small cabin stood behind them, smoke curling from the chimney. 2 cups still sat on the table, steam rising, fading into the air like a quiet promise between 2 people who had wandered too far to ever return to who they once were. At the fence line, Elias pointed to the horizon. "See that? Where the sky meets the land. Folks pass through here, say they're leaving, but most come back. Guess they see a piece of themselves in that light." Lydia watched, eyes soft. The light was pale, tender like the sky embracing the earth. she whispered. Maybe. I'll stay too. Elias didn't answer. He only nodded, but in his eyes, something shone: faith, peace, and a fragile kind of hope that had survived the fire. As the day waned, they sat again on the porch, finishing the last of the coffee. The final golden light streamed through the smoke, wrapping everything in a dreamlike calm. Lydia leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for believing in me." His reply came low, warm, steady. Weren't belief, Lydia. Just didn't want another good heart dying quiet. She smiled, eyes closing. Dawn had turned to dusk, but between them, a new light had only just begun. And in that wide, worn land once full of dust, blood, and fear, something small and sacred had taken root: hope. Part 7. The choice to stay. The days that followed drifted by, slowly, gentle, almost unreal, as if this land had never known violence or deceit. Each morning, just as the sun began to rise over the ridges, Lydia was already awake. She lit the fire, boiled the coffee, the soft crackle of wood blending with the breath of the wind. Elias would lead the horses out to pasture, check the fences, sometimes giving her a simple nod as he passed by. That nod, small and wordless, had become their morning ritual, a quiet greeting between two souls who no longer needed words. And so the days blended. No promises, no contracts, only two people, one small house, and the slow rhythm of life weaving them together as if both knew they'd found something they thought was lost forever. Lydia had never imagined living this way. She used to wake to the sound of gunfire, eat stale bread stolen in haste, and flee through the night before dawn. She'd always believed in the West. Softness was death. Yet now, each morning she felt an odd peace in the sound of horses neighing, wind brushing the fence, and coffee mingling with smoke. She began helping Elias mend fences, clear weeds, and haul water from the well. At first, her hands were clumsy, the rope too loose, the hammer too wild. Elias never scolded. He simply guided her hands, his voice low and calm. "Don't need strength, just patience." When she looked up, he smiled, a small, quiet curve of his lips that softened something deep inside her. By noon, they would rest under the lone tree near the paddock. Elias poured water from a metal canteen, handed it to her, and stared out toward the endless horizon. "You ever think about living somewhere else?" he asked. Lydia chuckled softly. "Sure. I once thought if I had enough money, I'd go to Kansas. Maybe start a little shop. But life doesn't walk the roads we draw." "Maybe not," he said. "But sometimes the wrong road's the one that gets you home." She met his gaze, and in the shimmer of his eyes, she wanted to believe it. The breeze carried the scent of earth and sweat, but beneath that burning sun, Lydia felt something she hadn't in years: calm. When the evening came, they led the horses back to the stable. Elias walked ahead. Lydia followed. The setting sun stretched their shadows long and red across the grass. Afterward, she lit the fire while he chopped wood. They didn't speak, yet every movement seemed in rhythm, as if they'd shared a lifetime already. Elias wasn't a man of words. He made no promises, no declarations. But in the quiet grace of his gestures, a hand steadying her when she stumbled, a glance when she smiled, there was a tenderness Lydia had never known. Those small things, when strung together, began to feel like something that didn't need a name. that night. Lydia sat on the porch, cradling a cup of cold coffee. The moon hung low, pouring silver over the sleeping fields. Beside her, Elias sharpened a knife, the blade catching the moonlight. She watched him for a while before speaking softly. Elias, yeah, I've been thinking about leaving. About how I don't belong nowhere. But then I realized all my life I've been running from people, from what I'd done, from myself. He paused, lifting his eyes. Firelight and moonlight met in his gaze, a soft, rare gentleness. Lydia took a deep breath, looked out at the open field, and said clearly, I ain't running no more. Silence followed, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Only the wind, the crack of cooling wood, and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Elias set down the knife. His eyes softened. He tilted his head slightly, voice quiet as a sigh. Then you're already home. The words struck something deep in her, not because they were sweet, but because they were true. Home, a simple word, one she had never dared to claim. And yet, somehow, it was there, resting in the voice of this quiet man. She smiled, the first real smile in years. Not guarded, not forced, just warm, unafraid. Elias saw it and smiled too. He poured her a fresh cup of coffee, handed it over. Steam rose, twisting into the moonlight, wrapping their faces in soft silver glow. A man who'd lost everything, and a woman who had just found herself again. The wind brushed past, like a whispered thank you. The last line of sunset burned along the horizon, glinting amber in Lydia's eyes. She turned to him, voice barely more than a breath. Do you ever regret letting me stay? Elias chuckled, low and warm. No, but if I did, reckon it's too late now. This land's got your scent already. They both laughed. The sound blended into the windlight. Fleeting, yet perfect. Not because they'd said I love you, but because they didn't need to anymore. After a moment, Lydia stood, stepping out into the yard. The sky stretched above, crowded with stars. She tilted her head back, wind threading through her hair, and felt something she hadn't felt in a lifetime, belonging behind her. Elias still sat by the lantern's glow, a figure carved from solitude and kindness. She turned, watching him for a long while, then said softly, Elias, thank you for staying when you had every reason not to. He looked up, voice steady but tender. Maybe I stayed because you reminded me everyone deserves forgiveness, even me. Her eyes blurred. The wind carried the faint scent of coffee, smoke, and something new, faith, above them. The sky shimmered with stars, witnesses to something fragile and sacred taking root. Love, not loud or sudden, but quiet and chosen. Lydia sat beside him again. Elias reached over, touching her hand gently. No promises, no future written ahead. Only the present, warm, real, and enough. She looked out across the field, whispering, funny thing about this land. Only the wind and kindness ever seemed to find their way back. Elias nodded. They sat in silence, watching the fire sink into embers, the moonlight soft on their faces and on Lydia's lips. The faintest smile of someone who, after a lifetime of running, had finally found her way home. Part 8. A past forgiven. The spring wind carried the scent of new grass and the damp breath of earth after a night of rain. Elias Kane's ranch looked different now. The fences stood straight. The well water ran clear, and wildflowers Lydia had planted bloomed around the yard. Life moved slow, gentle like the whisper of wind across open plains. No more pounding hooves in the dark. No more racing heartbeat of fear. Only the soft laughter of Lydia, each time Elias fumbled with the newborn colts. That morning, the sun rose late. The sky stretched wide and blue, clouds drifting white and idle. Elias scattered hay for the horses while Lydia cleared the breakfast table. Then the distant rhythm of hooves broke the calm. A stranger was approaching. She stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the light. A man rode toward them, his coat dusted gray, hat pulled low, and a badge glinting on his chest. Elias knew him instantly. Sheriff Dalton, an old acquaintance from Silver Creek. He dismounted, nodded to Elias, then glanced at Lydia, his expression kind but knowing. "Sorry to disturb a quiet morning," Dalton said, voice heavy with travel. "But there's news I reckon Miss Lydia should hear." The air went still. Lydia froze, her hands tightening at her sides. Elias's gaze softened. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, a small gesture, but enough to let her breathe again. Dalton sighed. "The Carson gang was caught yesterday, out west of El Paso. They confessed to everything. Spoke of a woman who once rode with them, thought she died in a sandstorm. But seeing you here now, Miss Cole, I reckon not everyone deserves to stay buried in their sins." Lydia said nothing. The breeze carried the smell of earth and grass. She looked down at her hands, once stained by dirt and guilt, now calloused and strong from work. The past was still there, like a shadow, but it no longer held weight. "You here to arrest me?" "Sheriff," she asked, voice steady. Dalton smiled, shaking his head. "No, ma'am. No one arrests someone who's already walked off the wrong road. You're not a fugitive anymore." He tipped his hat and mounted his horse. As he rode away, the red dust rose behind him, then vanished into the wind. Lydia stood still, watching him disappear over the ridge. A single tear fell, not from fear, not regret, but from the quiet realization that her past had finally stopped chasing her. Elias came to stand beside her. After a long silence, he spoke softly. "We all did wrong, once, but you stayed. That's what makes it right." She lifted her gaze to him. The sun glinted in his gray-blue eyes, turning them almost silver. She smiled a calm, peaceful smile. "You talk like I did something grand," she said gently. Elias shook his head. "Don't need to be grand. Stayin'. Workin'. Believing in good again. Sometimes that's the miracle itself." Her eyes shimmered. A tear rolled down her sun-browned cheek, glinting in the light. Not heavy, not bitter, just clear, like her soul had been washed clean. She said nothing, only leaned into him. Elias wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as sunlight bathed them, both the land itself seeming to bless their stillness. That afternoon, Lydia walked the fence line, fingertips tracing the rough wood, each crack, each knot, every mended piece they had built together. She remembered the early days, her hands trembling on the hammer. Now, they were sure, steady. She wasn't the woman who ran anymore. She was the one who stayed, the one who tended, the one who chose to keep what was good alive. The wind swept through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and dust. The sky turned pale gold, soft as a blanket laid over two souls sitting on the porch. Elias poured the coffee. Lydia sat beside him, her bare feet brushing the cool wood floor. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Together, they watched the sun sink beyond the hills. The smoke from their coffee curled upward, blurring into the last glow of day the color of forgiveness. Lydia whispered, almost to herself. Strange. Used to be. Every time I heard hooves, I got scared. Now, it just reminds me I'm still here. Elias smiled. Not just here, Lydia. You're alive again. She turned to him, eyes glistening with belief, the kind born not from hope, but from peace. Her smile was light and whole, like sunshine after rain, like dry earth drinking water. Night fell. They sat by the fire, quiet. Lydia rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the calm, steady beat of his heart. The firelight reflected in her eyes once shadowed by guilt, now clear and bright. No fear, no running, only truth, simple, gentle, and enough. And in that moment, Lydia Cole finally understood. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about being able to look back and smile because, at last, you chose the right road home. Part 9. The Storm and the Fire. The western sky has moods like a woman long-scarred gentle one moment, raging the next. That evening, the heavens turned dark. Wind rose hard, the black clouds rolling fast over the desert hills, twisting like great beasts waiting to strike. Elias Kane looked up, his brows drawn tight. He knew that smell, the sharp, heavy scent of a coming storm, of lightning and dirt, of nights when the world itself seemed to roar. He rushed to bring the horses in, while Lydia gathered hay, shuttered the windows, and fought to keep the wind from tearing through everything they had rebuilt. Watch that wind, he shouted, voice drowned in the thunder. Lydia nodded, hair whipping wild, her dress catching on the doorframe. She yanked it free just as the gust blew the lamp out, plunging the house into darkness. A flash split the sky open. For a heartbeat, everything was white. Then the sound, a crack of thunder so fierce it shook the ground. Elias turned toward the stables. A streak of fire had erupted there, red and violent, climbing into the rain-heavy air. Elias Lydia screamed. He spun around, saw the blaze, the smoke, the frantic shadows of horses trapped inside. He didn't hesitate. He ran. Lydia followed, her boots sinking into mud, rain lashing her face as the storm broke open. By the time they reached the stables, the door was burning, the horses screaming in panic. The roof hissed as the rain hit fire. Elias soaked a cloth, wrapped it around his head, and kicked through the lock. The door burst open, and terrified horses bolted into the storm, eyes flashing white in the lightning. Lydia, get 'em to the field, he shouted. She didn't think, just moved, pulling reins, shouting, guiding them out through the smoke. Mud reached her knees. Rain stung her skin, but she kept going. Then one of the young colts slipped, crying out, trapped in the muck. Lydia dropped beside it, pushing against its weight, her hands burning as the heat crept closer. Lydia, move, Elias roared. A beam crashed down, catching her shoulder flame, licking at her sleeve. She screamed. Elias dove in, smothering the fire with his bare hands, dragging her down into the wet earth. They hit the mud hard, the storm roaring around them, thunder cracking like cannon fire. For a long time, there was only the sound of rain, relentless, pounding, washing away flame and fear alike. Elias held her close, his breath ragged. When the fire finally dimmed, the stables were a black skeleton against the sky, smoke curling upward like ghosts. Lydia trembled in his arms, her hair drenched, her face streaked with mud, yet her eyes were bright, alive. He touched her shoulder, wincing at the red burn. "You're crazy," he rasped. That roof was about to fall. She smiled faintly, breath shallow. "Didn't want to see that horse die." Elias stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. His voice dropped low. "You risked your life for me." Lydia shook her head, a tired smile breaking through the rain. "Guess you stole more than my heart." Their eyes met, and in them, there was both flame and water, fear and faith, everything that could destroy or save them. The rain came harder, wind howling through the open fields. Elias pulled her closer, arms locked tight around her as if the storm might carry her away. Lydia leaned into him, heart pounding fast but steady, the rhythm of someone finally done running. When the rain eased, only the steady patter remained. The stables were half gone, but the horses stood safe out in the open, their breath steaming in the cool air. Lydia looked up, rain mixing with her tears, washing her clean. Elias followed her gaze, then looked back at her. In his eyes there was no despair, only a quiet certainty, the belief that even after fire, things can be built again, so long as someone stays to build them. She whispered, voice barely above the wind, "We can fix it. Can't we?" He nodded. "Yeah." Fire only takes the wood, not the will. Together they looked toward the open plains, where the last lightning flickered across the sky, a pale blue light shimmering like baptism over the land. The rain drowned the flames, carrying away ash and memory alike. Mud clung to their clothes, but neither cared. Elias pulled her closer, not out of fear, but because in that moment he knew she belonged here, with him, with the life they'd built from ruin. Lydia pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the strong, wild beat beneath his soaked shirt. Hear that she murmured. "Yeah," he said. "Still beaten." She smiled, faint but radiant. "Then we're still alive." He laughed a real laugh, rare and deep, shaking the rain from his face. When the storm finally passed, the sky opened silver. Raindrops glittered in her hair like glass. They stood there surrounded by mud, smoke, and the faint warmth of survival. Lydia leaned her head against his chest, his arms folding around her, both silent in their shared rebirth. Far to the east, a pale light broke through the clouds. Another dawn was coming after fire, after fear, after every lie they'd burned away. Lydia whispered, half to herself, maybe things gotta burn once, before they can grow again. Elias's voice rumbled low, steady as the winds return. Reckon that's true. Folks too, only when they're burned clean. They learn they can love again. The rain stopped completely. Above them, a faint rainbow stretched across the bruised sky, fragile but clear. They looked up, wordless. Then their hands found each other, and they stood still, two souls marked by storm and flame, holding fast to the simple, shining truth. The fire had passed and they were still here, together. Part 10. The home they built. Spring came softly to the west. No grand arrival, just warm streaks of sunlight slipping through the clouds, the scent of wet soil after rain, and the whisper of wind over grass reborn. From afar, Elias Kane's ranch no longer looked like the ruin it once was. The fences stood straight. The stable shone with new timber, and the well gurgled bright as Lydia drew water from it. Where fire had once swallowed the land, wildflowers now bloomed violet, yellow, white, sown by the same hands that had once known only flight and fear. Elias stood on the stable roof, hammering the last plank into place. Each strike echoed steady and sure, mingling with the wind and Lydia's soft laughter below. She knelt near the well, planting new rows of flowers. Every movement of hers was slow, deliberate, peaceful, as though she was planting not just seeds, but faith itself. When Elias climbed down, Lydia sat by an old wooden board propped near the porch. A carving knife glinted in her hand as she traced each letter carefully into the grain. He walked closer, wiping sweat from his brow, saying nothing as he watched the blade slide steady under her touch. Slowly, the words took form, deep and clean. Love can't be stolen, only given. She blew the sawdust away and looked up. Sunlight washed over the board, making the letters glow gold. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind moved, carrying the smell of coffee from the stove, the rustle of grass, and the rhythm of two hearts at peace. Elias rested a rough, warm hand on her shoulder. His voice was low, husky but gentle as breath. Reckon that's the truth I've waited for. Lydia turned to him, her eyes glimmering. You really think it's true? More than anything I ever knew, he said, and smiled. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun lean low over the field. Lydia brought out 2 cups of coffee, steam curling softly in the amber light. Elias took one, feeling its heat sink into his palms, simple, grounding, real. You ever think we'd make it here? She asked. After everything, he watched the horses grazing slow beneath the horizon. No. But I reckon sometimes God don't lead us through the desert to punish us. He just wants us to learn how to find the water again. She smiled, eyes following his gaze across the land. Where once dust and fear ruled, now sunlight and green returned. She reached out, running her fingers over the carved letters again, touching her own redemption. The wind stirred, sending petals dancing around the well. A young colt whinnied in the barn, a soft sound like music. Elias leaned back, voice low. See that? Lydia, sometimes what we need ain't a new beginning, just the courage to stay long enough to watch things bloom. Lydia looked at him, her eyes catching the light, bright and alive. I stayed. Elias, she said softly, and this time, I'm not going anywhere. He smiled, tired, content, the kind of smile that comes after long years of wandering. They both turned toward the field, where the sun poured its last gold across the grass. If there were a camera, it would pull back slowly past the wildflowers swaying in the breeze, past the well shimmering with evening light, past the thin ribbons of coffee smoke twisting into the air, until only 2 figures remained, seated side by side on the porch, quiet, whole, and finally home. The sky deepened into orange, wrapping the small ranch in warmth. This land, vast and scarred, now held 2 souls who had learned to love again, not through words, but through choosing to stay. On the wooden sign Lydia carved, the words caught the fading light like a vow: love can't be stolen, only given. It wasn't just a message for them, but for anyone who'd ever lost, feared, or thought love was something to be taken by force. Because out here, in the West, where both land and heart are shaped by fire and solitude, only kindness, patience, and honest love can truly save a soul. Elias lifted his cup, clinking it lightly against hers. Second chances sure taste better with you. Lydia laughed softly, her eyes warm in the fading sun. They sat together amid the smell of coffee and wildflowers. No ghosts left between them, only the quiet hum of the life they'd built. The evening breeze rolled across the grass, carrying the scent of blooms and earth. The little wooden house stood still against the golden plain, a home for two souls who had once been lost, now found again. Lydia leaned her head on Elias's shoulder. On the table, her carved sign caught the sunset's glow, its words gleaming red and bright. Love can't be stolen, only given. If this were a film, the camera would rise slowly, pulling away as the coffee smoke curled up into the orange sky, and in that silence, one could almost hear the sound of a heart steadying again. She came to steal a heart, and found one already hers to keep. Out here, in the wild silence of the West, love isn't taken, it's given. The last light stretched across the land, touching them both, two wanderers who had finally come home. Elias lifted his cup once more, smiling. Funny thing. You came to steal. But I'm the one who got saved. Lydia smiled back, voice soft as dusk. Maybe that's what love's supposed to do. Save us both. Above them, the sky burned crimson and gold. The wind stirred the flowers around the well, scattering petals like blessings over the soil where every trace of fear, sin, and sorrow had already turned to ash. And as the voiceover faded, warm and low, it carried the final truth of their story. Some hearts aren't lost. They're just waiting for the right hands to hold them again. Wild West US, where cowboys learn to love through redemption. Because true love, even if it comes late, can still save a soul.
He found peace, not by forgetting his past, but by forgiving